Thank you all, and thank you for joining us on this rescheduled overview and scrutiny committee meeting. Present at the meeting are members of the committee, cooperative members and representatives of the Harrow Youth Parliament. Also present is the leader of the council, he's arrived, the chief executive, the deputy leader and cabinet member for finance resources, and the cabinet member for equality and public health, as well as a number of council officers. I can see Shmila, Tracy, our director of HR, Dawn, our director of finance, with us as well. In terms of running the meeting, can I refer members and officers to the published protocols for holding virtual meetings? Members of the committee should have their videos on at all time, but have their microphones on mute unless they are speaking. All other members should switch off their videos and microphones on mute unless they are speaking on an event, on an item. In case of technical problems, we will adjourn until the issue is resolved. The meeting is, as is usually the case, video and audio recorded and is being live streamed, and a recording will be available on the council website. And if you do want to ask a question or come in, please use the hand up function in Teams. If that's not working or I don't spot your hand up, do wave furiously at your screen, or failing that, unmute yourself and just let me know. And obviously, if you've got any mobile phones or anything, if you put those on silent so they don't buzz during the meeting, that would be appreciated. On that, I'll go to item 1, which is attendance by reserve members. Got any reserve members? James.
I'd like to declare myself as a reserve member for the Labour Party.
Right, you are reserving for AJ Maru. And Ramji.
I'm reserving for Councillor Kanti Bobedia.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other reserves? No, I know Councillor Chris Moat was unwell this morning and not able to make it. So it's apologies.
Sorry, just to add to that, he appears to have been taken into hospital, unfortunately, with an infection, but because of the short notice, we weren't able to get another reserve, unfortunately. So it's the three of us today.
That's right, and obviously we wish Chris all a healthy return, hopefully very soon. Item 2 is declarations of interest. They have been published. If there's anything people are aware of other since being published, Ramji.
I just wanted to declare my wife works for Northwick Park Hospital now. She started this week.
Okay, great. No other declarations of interest. Oh yes, Jeff. Jeff, are you...
Right, yeah, I want to declare an interest on the house at Northwick Park and the house surface items as well.
Okay. No other interest, fine. Okay, so item 3 is equality, diversity, inclusion, and this is your agenda. This is pages 5 to 10 of your agenda. We will be spending around an hour for this item, and to start the thing, I'm going to bring both the cabinet member, Councillor Krishna Suresh, and Officer Shmila Dar, and Tracy, the director of HR, Tracy Connage. But I'm not sure who wants to start, Shmila, or do you want to start with the presentation?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
I'll start with the presentation. Okay. I'm just going to share my screen. If you just let me know when you can see it on your screen.
Yes, we can see that.
Great. Okay. Brilliant. So I just wanted to give an update on the work that we're doing around equality, diversity and inclusion. As you'll recall, we had launched a 3-strand approach to race equality back in September last year. and this was looking at addressing inequality in life outcomes, reviewing our services and our role as an employer. This was formulated in July 2020, and an independent race advisor was commissioned to take this work forward in terms of taking forward an internal review of our role as an employer and to also conduct a staff survey on race. The work actually took place over 3 months, which included the survey. Around 700 staff took part in the survey with a combination of the survey itself as well as one-to-one sessions. The recommendations were published in April this year, and they included a number of recommendations that centred around recruitment and retention, changing the organisation's culture through training and development, and also creating safe spaces for dialogue. What we wanted to do is make sure that we had addressed the issues around race equality with staff based on the principles of mutual trust, openness and honesty. And so really what we wanted to do was start to collaborate with staff around formulating the responses to those recommendations in a much more collaborative way. As I mentioned, the race review recommendation centred around 5 key strands. The first was around acknowledging and recognising the journey of righting the wrongs, and this was very much based around acknowledging the experiences faced by staff members at the council, and sort of looking at strengthening our relationship with them. The second is around recruitment and retention. The third is around changing the organisation's culture and behaviour through leadership training and development, very much looking at our leadership and training sort of offer for staff and what that might look like. And the fourth was around creating the creation of safe spaces for dialogue. So again, building up psychological safety of staff members within the organisation. And the fifth recommendation was around governance and accountability. So looking at the strategic positioning of equality, diversity and inclusion in the council, and also how that might be strengthened in order to have a much wider offer, and one that is much more targeted around providing support for all staff who fall within protected characteristics. As part of our response to the race review recommendations, what we wanted to do, as I mentioned, was have a more collaborative approach to responding to those recommendations. And the next stage really involves producing a corporate race action plan, which will include the council's high-level commitment to responding to those recommendations. And as I mentioned, we wanted to do this in consultation with staff that brings people along the journey with us and not something that sort of responds to those recommendations in isolation. We have a recognition that one size does not fit all, and therefore what we're doing is something quite different now, which is to have directorate level conversations and take the data that we managed to get from the race survey, aggregate it at a directorate level, giving us some of that more divisional insight, and having those conversations at that level to start thinking about service level challenges and what those aspirations might be in order to make sure that we are all on the same page around taking our corporate objectives seriously and within the right sort of direction of travel. This process is a 6-step action planning process. And the first part of that looks at trying to have, as I mentioned, greater collaboration with staff. So we undertook a number of focus groups between June and July, and there were 15 focus groups that took place, between May and June. We managed to cover around 250 staff members across the council, and these were based around the themes that I mentioned earlier around the recommendations. These were done with the HROD team, and it was actually quite interesting because HROD were able to sort of find out a little bit more about the insights from staff that had never really been done before, so that engagement piece was quite important. The second stage, which is where we are at now, is data analysis, and this is really getting that aggregated directorate level data from our workforce profile. So that's using the corporate information that we have on staffing, as well as aggregate data from the race survey, and using that with directorates to sort of understand the issues and the priorities within service areas. That will then lead to establishing priorities, including short, medium and long-term goals, in order to lead to a directorate vision that will feed into the race action plan. We are expecting that all measures will be SMART objectives, including considering what good looks like. And then we are also looking at having individual objectives that feed into this process, which are part of the overarching appraisal process. And finally, again, we're looking at how and when to review all of these objectives. So the roadmap is the thing that we're sort of looking at in more detail right now, and this is really around where we are. And I brought this to Scrutiny Leadership Group a few weeks ago, and this really looks at the process that we're undertaking to try and get the race action plan to implementation by November. So we've already published the race report. This was published in April. We undertook co-production between May and June with our staff. We now entered into the production of the corporate race action plan phase. And what we're hoping is that this process will take place from now until the end of August, with a view to the first iteration of the action plan going to CSB in the first week of September, and then for this to go to the cross-party members working group on Black Lives Matter and equality, diversity and inclusion, along with Scrutiny, and then the report will go to Cabinet in October. And again, as I mentioned, with view to have implementation by November. So I hope that hopefully that sums up where we are with the race action plan. I'm going to just bring Tracy in now to sort of if she wants to add to anything around what I've just shared.
Tracy.
Kate, clearly that's a very sort of comprehensive overview of the work that's been undertaken and some of the work that has already been completed. I think what's important to emphasise is that much of what is in the race action plan overlaps very well with the improvements we are making to our HR service and ensuring that we have a good staff development offer for our staff. So at the moment, we are working on development and diversity talent initiatives, including ensuring that our aspiring leaders, not only from a Black, Asian and multi-ethnic background, but staff who are aspiring to leadership generally, that there is programmes and opportunities in place, and also that we are able to support staff development and career aspirations, including supporting people in making their applications, preparing for interviews, some of the practical stuff that will help all staff, and also trying to match staff who want mentors and coaches to help them in their career planning, to make sure that that's available as well. Great.
Thank you for that, Tracy. Before I can see a number of people have indicated, but before I bring them in, I just want to wonder whether Krishna, as a cabinet member, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I would like to say the George Floyd tragedy is actually an eye opener, not just for the whole world and for the Harrow Council. And from this, we learned a lot from going through this process, and the race review is made it clear what kind of an issue that all these years the Harrow Council is faced with, and the lack of transparency, and what is their intention and what they are eagerly trying to do, and so forth. So it is a great finding, and especially, you know, I mean, the BAME are looking at the way of getting the mentoring coaching program, and they want to get involved in the training and development program, especially the leadership management program. with us, they wanted to mount those positions as well with a simple job description to understand, what they are there to offer and so forth. So I'm very pleased that this is going to work so well within the council, and I can't wait to wait for the action plan to come forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that. I'm going to bring people in the order in which I saw their hands go up. So it'll be Jean, Ramsey, Stephen, and then Sarah. So Jean.
Thank you very much, Sachin. Brilliant presentation. Thank you, Shamila, and Tracy's illumination on some of the areas. I suppose my concern, because I used to be chairman of Harrow Equalities Centre, which covered all aspects of hate crime, etc., racism, is that it's based, and I understand why, on the corporate race action plan that's been developed, prompted as Krishna said, following our responses to George Floyd's murder. What I would like to know about, and maybe this is something you've got planned, Tracy, is have you got other parallel processes, plans such as that for the other protected characteristics, such as disability, such as LGBTQ, etc. Do you have something in parallel there, or is this one leading the way, if you like, and then you're going to catch up with the others? I mean, either is okay as long as we're doing it and we're not ignoring. I'm chairman of high school kids with special needs, so I need to know that they are from certain race backgrounds and they have disabilities, learning difficulties, etc. So it's all tied up with that, and I know it's relating to our staff, but our staff could come from all those sort of backgrounds. Long question, but I hope you've got an answer for me. Thank you.
Okay, it's going to take Tracy or Shamila, who's best.
Yeah, go on, Tracy.
I think I should take it in terms of the focus on race is, as has been said, because we've had to prioritise the response to Black Lives Matter for obvious reasons. However, this is part of our overall approach to equalities, diversity and inclusion. So we're test driving some of the initiatives through the race action plan, but we are also recognising other issues of underrepresentation and needs through the programme. So the diversity talent programme that I referred to, we are already identifying, for example, the need to have programmes for women in junior roles and aspiring women leaders, and we will be targeting staff with disabilities. And by that I mean encouraging staff with disabilities to be part of these development initiatives, and we are also promoting programs for our LGBT plus staff. But you will be aware that both disabled groups and LGBT groups are at the moment less likely to have shared their status with us. So part of what we're doing is trying to promote confidence for those staff to come forward, and because we can't help or address what we don't know.
Great, thank you, Tracy.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up on that. I understand that, of course I do. We don't know what we don't know, and it would be useful to know how you're creating an environment where people who have disabilities, I can name myself, but there have got to be a lot of people out there, people wouldn't know they have disabilities, but it could be affecting. So how do you create that environment, Tracy?
As part of our Disability Confident campaign, we are now promoting the fact that we are disability welcoming as part of our employee branding, but we are also focusing on this internally. So you may be aware that there is a new staff network that was launched at the end of last year, which I think has got a lovely name, which is Dawn, standing for Disability and Wellbeing Network. But it is very much a new dawn for the organisation, because they're providing again a safe place for staff to raise and be consulted around the disability agenda. So I think that's really important, and their profile is being promoted through our staff Yammer groups and through our staff briefings. And this is all about, as I said, creating an atmosphere where people know that it's we have a positive approach, and that overlaps with work we've been doing on mental health. And we've recently had a staff webinar, which I must say we were very grateful that our chief exec presented as part of that, and we had over 400 of our staff attend it, and again that was very important. The message we were promoting was it's okay not to be okay, and also to alert staff to the support resources that they can have, and the confidentiality of those resources that are provided by our employee assistance programme.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tracy.
Ramji.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Tracy and Simon. It's really good. There's one thing I noticed on there, which you talked about equality and fairness, but there isn't anything there related to if a employee finds it difficult to speak to somebody independent. You're speaking to the same organisation, but if the person feels that it's not right and he wants somebody independent, it doesn't have anything provisions for that, to have somebody independent who looks at it from the outside instead of within.
Okay. Who's best to answer that one? Is that Tracy again?
Again, I'm happy to answer that. I mean, one of the things that's really important about what's happened in relation to the Race Action Plan is that it's all started with our commissioning Patrick Vernon OBE as an independent advisor. And we know that that has been very successful in attracting staff to someone. You know, lots of our staff have chosen to speak and share with him as part of the formal focus groups, and in terms of directly contacting him in order to share their experience. That's been followed up now with the setup of the new Equalities, Diversity and Inclusion team, which Shamila now heads up, and that team has given staff a new channel where they feel that they can confidently contact them in order to discuss and raise equality issues outside of the formal processes, i.e. having to go via line managers or having to make a formal complaint or use a formal policy with HR. So within the plans to, again, promote a dignity at work and fairness culture within the organisation, we are proposing to have dignity at work champions, and those will be staff who are trained in mediation skills, as well as other heightened, shall we say, awareness of equality issues, who will be able to support staff, again, outside of the line, independently, in order to be able to progress their equality concerns.
Great.
Can I come back with another question?
If it's quick, please, because we've got a number of people to get through.
What is the retention of staff at this present moment in the council?
Sorry, did you say retention?
Yes, compared to the staff that we have, all the disputes that we have, or if we do get any disputes, how many of those staff retain staying within the council, or do they move on?
I'd have to say, but I can't give you a kind of figure at the moment. However, we are resolving disputes, and I know Shamilat can say a bit more about the kind of issues that staff have raised with the EDI team that have been able to be resolved, you know, without needing to go through any process, and therefore because the issue's resolved, we are retaining staff. If we don't have a high level of formal complaints that are in the system at the moment, but we are now monitoring our cases, and one of the things that we will be able to report on going forward is what the outcomes of cases are, so we will know whether staff who have been involved in grievances and equality casework, whether they remain or whether they leave. So I hope in a year's time, Councillor Chowan, I should be able to say to you quite definitively, this is what the retention is.
Great, thank you. We are questions are straying slightly outside the remit of what we were trying to focus on, specifically things coming out of Black Lives Matter. So I have given a bit of latitude, but I will try and keep us to where we're trying to go. And on that note, I'll bring in Stephen.
Thank you very much, and thank you for a very interesting presentation. And I take particular interest in this because in my day job I'm actually on a diversity inclusion working group myself in my department. So it's quite an interesting exercise to sort of compare notes, really. One thing that and sort of following on from Councillor Chauhan's point, but one thing that struck me from the race review report that was produced earlier this year was there's quite a big sort of chunk in there that raises sorts of issues to do with management culture. So from a sort of equality background, sort of lack of development opportunities, people feeling not listened to, lack of appraisals, poor working relationship, glass ceilings, uncomfortable with raising issues directly. So it feels like some of a lot of that would be going a long way in dealing with that by dealing with some of these things, and some of them could be fairly straightforward to resolve and possibly some more complicated. But is anything specifically going to be done in order to address that?
Is that probably Shmila to start?
Yeah, so I mean, as I said, Councillor, we undertook a number of focus groups recently over May and June, and we asked staff exactly these questions. What do you want to see change? As part of those recommendations, what can we do in the organisation to start to have a much more consistent approach to one-to-ones and appraisals? And that is exactly what we're looking at, which is to drive consistency in the appraisal system and to make sure that all staff get the same offer. So it's disparate. In some areas of the council, some people are having one-to-ones that are weekly, monthly, whereas others, you know, you may not even have a one-to-one for a whole year, and it just sort of the appraisal sort of system pops up. So there is a culture change program that needs to happen with managers, and that's not to say that, you know, managers themselves have got a lot of pressures on them themselves. So there is a piece of work that needs to happen with managers as well to sort of almost bring them up to speed. We are going to be doing a focus group in September with managers, with Leadership Forum, around some of the things that have come out of the focus group, and specifically looking at that consistency and approach around one-to-ones and appraisals, as you mentioned, but also this thing around you know, staff not feeling or having that open door policy. we have started to see a shift in the culture. There are some early adopters within the organisation that actually are very, very useful, because these are the people who we can almost champion and push forward some of these things quite quickly. And then obviously there is a piece of work that to be done with those people who are who require a bit more support to get there. So I think that it's a dual process, but I'll let Tracy come in on this as well.
I think it's important to say that improving management development and management training is also part of the baseline for having the right culture, because good managers will have good practices, inclusive practices for their staff. So we are introducing a general management training program. It's already started, and we know that the feedback from managers who have gone through it is that they find it very helpful and practical. Combining that with a new equalities training program, which will be for staff and managers, will only augment, hopefully, inclusive leadership as being part of the way we do things in Harrow. So supporting managers to manage well has to be a key part of what we do, and at the same time, whilst everybody is growing on this journey, making sure that there are avenues for staff to also increase the support that they get if they are currently finding that their situation may be one where they feel that they don't have enough access to not just support from their managers, but one of the things we know that most of our staff want career development opportunities. So what we're hoping to do is to support them and develop our managers, and support and develop our staff at the same time. And so hopefully we'll come to that sort of happy place of people feeling that Harrow is actually taking this seriously and not waiting, you know, until someone's gone through a 3 to 6 months training course before they see any change.
Could I ask a quick follow-up?
Yep.
Thank you very much for those answers. That's very comprehensive. Just wanted to quickly ask, obviously with the shift towards more remote and hybrid working, is there a risk that certainly for people particularly with protected characteristics, some of these issues might heighten, and people might sort of feel like they sort of fall through the cracks a little bit? You know, issues might not get picked up. Is that a risk, and is that something that you're alive to, and you know is looking to get mitigated?
Yeah, it is, because we're now building in to all our support to the reality that most staff are being managed remotely, and managers are clearly managing remotely. So the opportunity, for example, for staff to raise issues, we're making sure that that's there, but also reminding managers, and I mentioned mental health, that's one of the key ones. We know that it's really key that managers are able to monitor and spot issues with their staff remotely, which is of course is a very different situation to when you know, people would be in an office environment. So we are building that into all of the tools that we have.
Great, thank you for that. So I've got Sarah, Dan, and then James. So Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to ask, looking at the race review report, point 7, the recommendation that a similar review or process with residents, community organisations, faith groups and businesses takes place. I just wondered if there were any further plans for when that might be happening. Thank you.
Shmaila.
Yeah, I can take that. So at the moment, Councillor, we have already, there's some work has already started. So the three areas that we've already started that work is around education, some work with our charity sector partners around delivering youth services, and also reviewing our current homelessness services. So looking at our sort of how we deliver housing, etc. And that work is already taking place at the moment. But you know, as you'll appreciate, there is. Sorry, I can hear feedback. There's almost like a process to this, because at the moment we are trying to almost do the workforce work first, so that we can kind of get our own internal house in order first, and then do some of the work that we're doing externally. However, that's not to say that that work isn't already taking place. So we've recently invested £100,000 in some of the work that we're doing in the community, and that's with, in particular, working with families of Afro-Caribbean and Somali heritage around building up parenting skills and advocacy skills, and around school exclusions as well. And then again, like as I said, working with our homelessness team around trying to have a much more holistic approach around how we deal with the issue of homelessness. So those are the three areas of work. But what we're looking to do is have bring together a partnership of voluntary sector community organisations, as well as the council, that can work together to address some of the issues that are coming out of the community. There was also a community-led discussion, a webinar that took place a few months ago that looked specifically around health inequalities in the Black community in Harrow. And again, there are some sort of findings that are coming out of that work too, that we're trying to address. But again, this work is happening kind of at its own pace, given capacity and resource issues around how much can be done, with sort of keeping in mind that we've got all this other work happening in the background as well on the workforce race side of things. So I hope that kind of captures and what the work that we're doing and answers your question.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. Thank you. That's great.
Great. Dan.
Am I unmuted?
We can hear you.
Okay. Thanks again for the report. I was just interested in the focus groups that have been completed over the last couple of months, and just to get your impression on how successful you think they've been in gathering the broad picture of experience that we need for this to be a successful exercise. So in particular, different background of people who attended, particularly from the African and Caribbean communities, which the report highlighted experienced particularly bad outcomes. So how reflective do you think that process was, and how well do you think the focus groups have provided that co-production that we need?
Shmaila.
Yeah, so we had just over 230 members of staff attend the focus groups, and which I think is actually a huge number of people to have attended. I think that the fact that things are happening remotely offers the opportunity for more people to engage in this process. We had a wide variety and a range of grades of people from different grades attending, which included those from corporate leadership group, which is director level, as well as those within junior grades, so sort of G6 and below, G9 and 11. So we had a range of those from different grades. And I think what was really interesting as part of that process was actually to bring people who probably wouldn't have the opportunity to be in that kind of forum before, talking about their experiences. And I do feel that this is actually part of the cultural training programme. So one of the things that staff mentioned was actually they want to have more focus groups to continue the dialogue, and just sort of responding to the earlier point that was made around building up trust and whether or not staff feel that they can openly have this dialogue. I do think that the focus groups have been very well received, and provide that opportunity and that channel for that trust to start being built up, because genuinely staff feel heard, and this process of co-production is probably something that I've never seen before, at least in my last sort of 4.5 years of being here. And again, I think a lot of this is down to the fact that people can access the focus groups because they were remotely done. I think if it was done in the Civic Centre, it would have been much more difficult for people to sort of take time off work, come in for 2 hours, but people have been dipping in and out of it. And yeah, I think generally speaking, we had good attendance from all 3 directorates. We also managed to do a session at Forward Drive as well with some staff who were not able to access the remote session. It wasn't as well attended, and that I think has got to do with the fact that people work in different shifts. Myself and Patrick Vernon were there for the whole day, but we did get emails sent in later and phone calls from staff members who wanted to discuss the things that were discussed on the focus group. So I do think we tried every avenue we possibly could to do outreach and to engage with staff, and I think I would call 230 staff just above a success, actually.
Dan, did you have any follow-up? No? Okay. James.
Yeah, brilliant presentation. I'm really glad that we've moved pressing ahead with focus groups. It's always good to get the opinions of staff and actually follow through with what they say. My question's more on hires, internal versus external hires, especially in management positions and senior management positions. Have we changed the mix? Do you know what the mix is? Do we have any stats on that? Are we going more of the direction of internal hires? And also, do we have any stats on ethnicities or anything like that? Because I think that's one of the areas of an indicator of whether we're actually promoting people internally, is to actually see whether we're actually still relying on externals. And I'm not sure if you've got any stats on contractors and or whether we actually negate contractors from all this kind of discussion.
I see that Sean has his hand up, so I think Sean wants to come in on that. Sean.
Yeah, thanks, James. Thank you for that question. I mean, I'll let Tracy and Shamila pick up more of the detail, but I think one of the things that is very much worth pointing out is that we are very conscious that, with the exception of Tracy, the senior leadership of the council is very white and is more male than we would also want it as well, not exclusively so. We of course have Dawn and Angela as part of the senior leadership team as well, but it absolutely does not represent and reflect the borough. One of the things that we did very differently and very consciously differently was in the recent recruitment of the corporate director for communities, both in part to make the judgment on our recruitment partner based upon their track record and approach to generating a diverse shortlist campaign, etc., and also to ensure that we built in sort of representation at all levels, from both the recruiting management team to the member appointments panel, to make sure that was as diverse as we could get it. And we did end up with a more diverse group of applicants, and we did end up with a more diverse shortlist, and we did end up with a first appointment of a female black and multi-ethnic member of staff at corporate director level as a result of that. Now, I wouldn't want to be complacent about that, and that doesn't mean that the next time we do the same recruitment process we would necessarily get the same result. But I do think that we did try and take everything that we could do in terms of best practice and to apply that, and it certainly bore dividends, I think, in the two most important areas, which is actually getting a broader range of applicants and a broader range of people shortlisted. And I would be hopeful and encouraging that if we apply the same approach in the end, we should be successful. I think at the very senior levels at the moment, that probably means that we will have to rely on that broadening out of the protected characteristic diversity more often than not from an external pool, because the numbers of people at the next level that could legitimately at the moment compete internally is less. Where we do, I think, a lot of scope is we have a lot of good middle and senior managers from diverse backgrounds, so that when we start to recruit for directors rather than corporate directors, I would be hopeful that we've got a lot more experience and stronger internal candidates. So I think, James, it's neither one or the other. I think it's about trying to encourage the best diversification of talent by taking the right approach externally, particularly in those areas where we don't have huge amounts of diversity internally, but also making sure that we build up the internal talent pool at the same. And I'm encouraged by the fact that we will have quite a few senior vacancies, particularly in the Communities Directorate in the next year or so, because we have a number of interims and we are sort of holding off recruiting until the new corporate director arrives. But I would expect that we will have, you know, 3 or 4 director level posts to advertise in the next 6 to 12 months, which I would hope that would also give us an opportunity to increase diversity at senior levels.
Thank you for that, Sean. Tracy or Shmuel, if there's anything you'd like to add, don't feel that you have to if there isn't, but if there is anything you'd like to add, I'll give you the floor. No from Shmuel and then Tracy.
I think just the question about statistics, just to say that we are starting to report on the diversity statistics for our recruitment, and that includes all our recruitment and agency staff. It doesn't cover contractors that are outside of IR35, but we are definitely looking at the patterns for both permanent recruitment and agency recruitment, but we don't have those statistics available now, and I couldn't give you a clear idea of what the patterns are, but that's something we can provide in the future.
There's something you're monitoring, because I presume that's
yes.
a good tell on whether things are going in the right direction. I mean, are we trying to hire more? Are we hiring more people internally than externally?
We are prioritising internal recruitment, so we are advertising posts internally first. And for exactly that reason, and that's part of the feedback that we've had, not just again from BME staff, we've had that feedback from our staff generally, that they want to feel that we are nurturing internal talent as well, and not just going externally. But as Sean has explained, for some roles, it's especially at the upper end, it's necessary to do that if we want to have a diverse shortlist.
If I may ask just one question, Chair.
Yeah, if it's quick.
Is any intention of maybe having fast track schemes to these corporate directorate levels, and have it like something which is done years in advance, so you can actually start nurturing from an earlier stage?
Very definitely. I think I mentioned we're looking at aspiring leaders and leadership development programs, and that's exactly what that's about. It's actually nurturing and developing our internal talent pools, because that hasn't happened for the last 10 years.
Thank you so much, Chair, for letting me have that question. Thank you, Tracy, and everyone else for the response.
Thanks. I've got a question, Shmuel. You've got a really tough job in implementing what is quite a wide-ranging and hard-hitting report. Have you found any barriers within the organisation in terms of implementing it?
I guess it just comes back to the point about management engagement, and just trying to kind of ensure that everyone's taken on board as part of the process. And I think there has been obviously it's mixed across the organisation. Some managers are very engaged. As I mentioned, we've got some real good examples of early adopters. There are some areas of the organisation that probably need to tease it out a little bit more. However, I'm confident that when we start our directorate level discussions, which are happening with divisional directors and the corporate directors, that will start to be teased out. Because at the moment it's all a bit sort of corporate and high level for everybody, but when it starts to be drilled down home a little bit more for specific service areas, I'm confident that actually that's going to start breaking through some of that.
Great, and conscious that the leader, the deputy leader, and the cabinet member responsible is listening. So, is there anything you'd like the administration to do differently to help you in implementing the report?
I think generally speaking, we're in a good place at the moment. I think the programme is working at pace. We've got a good solid timeline. I think generally speaking, at the moment we are okay. However, the proof will really be in the implementation, and I think sort of come October time when this goes to cabinet, how we are able to implement this programme and these very ambitious ideas is going to be something that we probably need to make sure that we have enough capacity and resource around.
Great, thank you. And are there any other questions? If not, I will. I'll ask a final on to Krishna. Krishna, having listened to, you've got a big tick from Shamila on the work the administration is doing, and I think that's very positive. But one of the key things in implementing this report is around political leadership. What are you doing in terms of taking this report and speaking to your other cabinet colleagues and others around how we mainstream and truly implement this report throughout the council?
Yeah, I think we need to start doing that. I haven't done that yet, but passed on the information with my colleagues about on a monthly report is being circulated. But going forward, I think it's important that we have to be very transparent, as said, and to making sure that the voices be heard by this and the free space for all the employees is very important. They should be able to speak freely about their issues and where they stand, and those are the things also very important. In addition to their the progression with their career, whether they are emotionally, mentally, or fit, or is there any discrepancy that they are coming across and so forth. So it is important that the action plan it would resolve most of the stuff that has been discussed today. I remember Martin Luther King one time said, I want to see for my children recognized for the contents of their character rather than the color of their skin. So this is what I would like to see in our Harrow Council. Each and every employee should feel free to speak up and to share their wisdom and issues and so forth. So I think some of the agenda we have got it here will give them the openness to share everything with a corporate. I'm not as Shushmila said, the management level at the moment. I think it is the message to the chief executive as well. I mean, they should be more user friendly. We need an approachable management team so that they can listen and carry that forward to resolve issues. I think this is the best way forward, and I'm glad that we had this Harrow Council had this opportunity to do it in Harrow style. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I see Sean's put his hand up. Sean.
It's only a brief comment, Chair, because I'm sure we'll spend quite a bit of time on it on the next agenda item, but the biggest challenge actually to date and going forward will be finding sufficient capacity, headspace and focus to take forward this agenda in the way in which we would want it to, whilst dealing with a global pandemic.
Yeah,
that has fundamentally been the single biggest challenge that the programme has actually faced to date, and probably will continue to be so for the next year.
Great, thank you. That's a point made. Are there any other questions or comments? No. In which case, can I thank Shamila, Tracy, and anyone else involved in the presentation. I think it's an incredibly important piece of work the council's doing. Really glad that you're able to come, and the amount of time that's been spent both with the Scrutiny leadership team and this committee, and I know we'll be back on this topic as well. So thank you for coming, and can I ask the committee to note the presentation? Is that noted? Yep. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Of course, Tracy Schmell, you are more than welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but if you want to go have dinner, we totally understand that too. Thank you very much. I'll move on to
thank you, Chair.
Item 4.
Thanks.
Item 4 is our open question and answer session with the leader, the chief executive. We've also got the deputy leader here as well, Natasha Proctor. So the way this is going to work is we have identified some topics for questions. Questions are COVID related, council finance, equality, although as we've just discussed it, it's likely to be small or less, some performance consultation issues, borough plan, and then maybe finishing off with a bit of HSDP. But again, we've dealt with that quite a bit. But I'm going to ask Sean to open with presentation, although actually the leader may want to come in first, but Sean does have a presentation, but I'll ask the leader if he wants to come in first. Graham?
Actually, can Sean go first and I'll pick out the bits he might miss?
So I realised Sean looked a bit confused when I said the topic areas. I may have not. I'm not sure if I did.
No, it's all right. I've got them, so it's okay. I was just checking. Yeah, that's fine, Chair. I've got them.
So you gave me a look that made me think I've not sent something that I should have sent. But on that note, I'll hand over to Sean.
Can I just check, Chair, that members can see that presentation?
It is. Yes, it is now come up on my screen. Yeah.
And I'm going to be brief, Chair, because I know that you want to maximise the amount of time for questions, and I will be brief and you will have seen this. I mean, I think the key thing in terms of the strategic context clearly is that COVID will continue to dominate the work of the council for at least the next 9 to 12 months. And I think that will, broadly operate on a number of different levels. Some of that is about ongoing activity in terms of things such as vaccination, testing, restart of services, all of those sorts of things. And that's pretty key. The next thing as well is to say that obviously there are very significant service pressures that have come about because of COVID. I'm happy to go into this in more detail, but in a practical sense, we are seeing at the moment probably a 20% increase in presentation around adult social care as a result of the suppression of demand and challenges coming out of lockdown. And I'm sure I don't need to tell any member the amount of pent-up demand there is around things such as environmental services. So very significant level of demand. There is also a significant amount of activity around recovery. Everything from the economy, education, mental health, and again, there is a huge backlog in elective healthcare, which then ultimately transfers into social care. And we have been managing a global pandemic for almost 17 months, and organisational and staff resilience in that regard is a significant issue. So just in terms of strategic priorities, I think what this essentially says, Chair, and I'm trying to keep this in a strategic level as simple as possible. COVID, the ongoing COVID response and dealing with the legacy of COVID will take up a very significant amount of corporate and directorate capacity and political capacity, everything from headspace, thinking, response and delivery, which will continue to significantly reduce, not like it did 12 months ago when you couldn't do anything other than COVID, but will significantly reduce the amount of capacity and ability to respond to anything broader than COVID. So in that context, we'll have to be very focused about what we actually are able to do. So on this slide, we've identified that obviously there are some key priorities around the HSDP, wider regeneration strategy, the accommodation strategy, health and social care integration, the equalities, diversity and inclusion agenda, a whole series of slightly more inward facing but still very important modernisation programmes. You know, we're introducing a replacement for the SAP system at the moment, lots of work around changing culture that we've talked about, lots of improvements required around IT, HR. We have the ongoing challenges around the budget and the medium-term financial strategy. And I think we have to be realistic, therefore, that a number of things that we might have wished to have put more focus on had the pandemic not come along will have to take somewhat of a back seat, certainly for the next 12 months. I think what I would therefore say is that the only thing that is certain is uncertainty. It's uncertainty about what the size and scope of the pandemic is. I am naturally a cautious pessimist, which I guess is partly what you pay me for. But I think that we are still in for a difficult 6 to 9 months around the pandemic. I think the winter in particular will be very challenging, with a normal winter flu season, COVID and a significant booster vaccination programme to deliver. I think that will be particularly difficult. But the good news is that we will be able to do some other things, but balancing pandemic response, recovery and sort of some form of return to business as usual will be a challenge. Council finances are also extremely uncertain. I was at a meeting of colleague chief execs last week, and I think that the consensus view is that, largely because it's unclear what the government will do next year in terms of recognising COVID pressures, I think the range of outcomes for the council around the finances are about as uncertain as they've ever been. We are currently in an okay position, but the reason we are in an okay position is because we have had lots of one-off and special funding for COVID. If that disappears, the council will be in a very challenging situation, but it's very unclear what medium-term government response will be around that. So lots of uncertainty, lots of, I suppose, fighting on multiple fronts. I think the council's done really, really well in terms of its response to COVID, and I think we will continue to do so. But dealing with that and recovery and the financial scenario that we face and the priorities we sense will, after 16, 18 months of dealing with a global pandemic, mean that the ability for the organisation to do a great deal more will be pretty challenging. So hopefully that's a bit of a high level summary about what the context is, and also within that context where the priorities will probably need to lie.
Great, thank you. Sean Graham, do you want to give us a short presentation?
Well, actually, I'd just like to add into one thing that Sean was talking about, which is we're still not out of the pandemic. So we heard the statement today from the Prime Minister, who's saying that lockdown and restrictions are being reduced, and hopefully by mid-August they'll be reduced even further. But this is against the backdrop that they believe that the infection rate is going to hit over 100,000 people a day, and under self-isolation rules are changing, but it will impact on staff as well. If we've firstly that they might have to self-isolate, and we don't know where they're coming from. There's a shortage of HGV drivers in the country, and there's a major pressure against adult social care that Sean's already indicated. We're hoping the National Health Service is trying to deal with the significant backlog of elective care throughout the whole system. I think they said today they're operating at 120% compared to last year, so they're pushing it hard. But that's against hoping that we don't see any more people going into hospital, but they have done over the last week. So it's a lot of it is, while we'd like to be quite positive around a number of things, and I think we can be positive in the way we've reacted to COVID and how we got through it, I think we've got to be quite cautious in some elements about trying to restart some services against when we don't know what the certainty will be around how COVID would fall through. So with the secondary vaccinations starting in probably late September and being prioritised, it still could lead to, if the variants were to change again or a new variant turns up, we could quickly be back into the situation we find ourselves in the moment. And I'd like to finish on just one point is we do talk about the staff a lot, and that's what we're here for tonight. It's about our council staff. You know, we've been working on this for nearly 18 months now, and when you speak to some staff, some of them only had 2 weeks holiday in that amount of time, and I know that they've been on conference calls with me, you know, 7 days a week. You know, on a Sunday you get a phone call that's because an announcement's come through or something has gone wrong, and so they haven't had that break. And I think people are sort of not tetchy, but they are sort of getting worn out quite quickly, and that's something Tracy's working on to make sure that we can ensure people are taking the holidays as quickly as they can through August, bringing in an extra staff if we need to, but it is a significant challenge, and I think we just need to be cautious of that before pushing too hard in trying to reopen up and think things are back to normal when they're quite clearly not. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Graham. So we've got a number of areas, and we want to try and stick to the hour and a half for this item here. To again, because Graham's point is we don't want to keep officers late because we know they are working long hours. So as usual, my usual plea of short questions, short answers for your bonus points will be much appreciated. So we'll start with questions around COVID, and you know that we should be looking for 15-20 minutes for this area. So any questions on COVID? Oh, no. Okay. Oh, Ramji.
Just related to the COVID issue, how are the staff coping related to COVID, and how many are put on furlough related to issues of health?
So, try and do a short answer. No council staff have been furloughed. It hasn't been, well, A would have been not unnecessary, but secondly, very frowned on for public sector employers to furlough staff, given the nature of public sector employment. Relatively speaking, except in the peak of the second wave, the impact in terms of council staff, in terms of high level sickness absence and self-isolation from COVID, has always been relatively manageable. That hasn't been a major issue or concern. I think the big and actually morale and motivation, based upon the surveys that we've done of staff, has actually held up pretty well. The real challenge is the long periods of time which large numbers of staff have been working without any significant breaks, and one of the things that we are pushing very hard this summer is that people do take their holidays that they have accrued and built up, because it's very important that they do so, because you know, people have thrown an inordinate amount of effort over a very long period of time at this. So I think my greater concern is burnout rather than illness.
Great, thank you. Jeff.
Yes, I mean, obviously the COVID is putting a great increase on sort of the pressures already on social care, but I think the picture about sort of number of people and the symptoms with long COVID seem to be becoming clearer now, and that's clearly going to add even more pressure on social care. Have we done any work or got any idea how long, well, not how long COVID is going to last, but what effect long COVID is going to have in the long term on social care provision, or the pressures on social care provision?
I think, other than at a very general level, Jeff, no, because I think that actually the majority of pressures that we are receiving at the moment in social care are not long COVID related. They are essentially due to people who perhaps have been quite elderly and quite frail but have survived COVID, but have effectively been more debilitated by COVID, but not in a long COVID sense. because although is one sense, clearly there's been a lot of people not presenting to health or social care during the pandemic, which probably means when they do present they are more frail or unwell than they were previously. And thirdly, there's been a big set of catch up in the system in terms of elective care. And, you know, one of the things that we are finding is that people are being discharged from hospital with higher levels of packages of care that are required. So I think long COVID will ultimately become one of the big social care pressures, but at the moment it's a relatively small level of the impact compared to other pressures that are coming through around social care, which are more acute and short term.
Well, if I can, I mean, I suppose the other thing related to that is at the moment a lot of people who are suffering from long COVID because of sort of a lockdown, they've got family members or whatever still at home. So they haven't been relying on social care, but as people are going back to work more, and they are to quite a high level now, that means that those people who are left at home suffering from long COVID clearly will possibly be making more demands.
That could be the case, and of course I suspect that there are going to be an awful lot of people with long COVID who aren't eligible for social care.
Yeah.
Graham, did you want to come in?
Yes, just briefly, Public Health England and the NHS doing a lot of work around long COVID. They've noticed that this, since people who've had COVID since January have been probably more harshly affected. Actually, people from December, sorry, they have more people coming through with the symptoms of long COVID. But you'll be pleased to know we do have a webinar tomorrow night. Every night we're out on the TV, but we do have a webinar next tomorrow night where we're bringing some specialists in who can talk about some of the things they can do. But one of the concerns they do have is the NHS had is that people are very hesitant of sort of contacting their GPs at the moment. You know, they think they're overworked and the sort of minor ailments where before they might go to the doctors and this time they're not. And some of these symptoms are being sort of hidden away at the moment. So as people start going back to work or when they can get to see their GP, we'll probably see a bigger picture around long COVID.
Thank you, Graham. Stephen.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you for the presentation, and also well done to all the staff working on the COVID, all the various COVID pieces of work, and thank you for all you're doing. You mentioned in the presentation about the knock-on impacts of COVID on council priorities and how things might be limited. Where do we stand at the moment in terms of the impact on sort of so-called bread and butter services of the council, like bin collections and street cleaning and you know, road maintenance and all of those sorts of things? Are they sort of running reasonably normally at the moment, or are there particular pressures in certain places?
So I think they're certainly running reasonably normally, Stephen. I think, and this is a sort of a bit of a generalisation. So I suppose what we've sought to try and do is to try and keep everything running to a reasonable level, if that makes sense. So, you know, the attempt has always been to, you know, not switch things off or make service reductions too much. I think what is, it's probably fair to say is that, and members might say this has never been the case, I think that, you know, responsiveness and gold-platedness is probably a bit too much to ask at the moment. So I think in terms of, you know, is the bread and butter of our core services, you know, delivering to an acceptable standard, you know, with the obvious exception when we get something wrong, yes, it is. Are we able to always respond to the public or member requests as quickly as we might want to do? And are we able to go the extra mile? Probably not. But I think that's, and that's, you know, that's probably where the compromise is. But I think that, you know, they're okay. That's what I would say. They're all right. But I wouldn't pretend that if there wasn't COVID, and we wouldn't be able, and there wouldn't be more focus on perhaps trying to make more improvements. It's that type of compromise I think that we're making. But we're not, we're not particularly missing any more bins. We're not undertaking maintenance. We're not sorting the parks in the normal way, but we're probably not doing special projects, and we're probably not focusing on service improvements quite as we might do if we weren't just getting the basics right.
Great. Dan, your hand did come up and then went down, but now it's back up again. Dan.
Oh, right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Might just kind of a follow up on that question, Sean, which is, and this is a difficult question, I appreciate it, but how far into the future do you anticipate the council being affected by COVID in its day-to-day work? I know from what I've read, we're expecting another peak in the winter. Obviously, restrictions are lifted next week, and I just wondered whether you were working to a broad timeline of how far into the future COVID is going to be affecting the council's delivery.
So I think in the presentation I said I think that it will have an impact on the council's work for the next 9 to 12 months minimum. And I think what it'll have is it'll have an impact in a number of different ways. I think certainly for the next 6 months, during and over the winter. I mean, this is a personal view, not one that you need that is necessarily controversial. I think as a nation we are in for a difficult winter. The mixture of a normal winter flu season, COVID, etc., etc. I would be surprised if the NHS and social care isn't under extreme pressure in the winter. So I think that will play through. However successful, and it has been incredibly successful, the vaccination programme is, there'll continue to be quite a lot of work on COVID. We are about to start a booster vaccination programme in the autumn. Anticipation that children over 16 will also start get vaccinated, etc., etc. And there's an awful lot of recovery backlog. Furlough hasn't really finished yet. We could see a significant spike in unemployment. I think there's an expectation that there'll be big challenges around housing, homelessness, etc. There are really big pressures in social care. In children's social care, the numbers of children in the system have gone up significantly. There are 1,000 extra children in Harrow who are currently receiving free school meals compared to pre-COVID. You can just see through the whole system that the impact is quite big, plus the ongoing activity. So I would be surprised if in a sort of diminishing way we weren't having some conversation at this meeting this time next year when we're saying, the impact of COVID is significantly less than it was, but there is still a tail and a legacy. I think the next 6 months are going to be the most difficult.
I would say thank you for the answer, but slightly more doom-mongering than I thought.
I would always admit that if on the optimism pessimism scale, I'm not at the optimistic end of the spectrum generally. So you need to factor that into the answer.
But I think you've been broadly right so far. So I think we can go with that. Jeff, I saw your hand go up and then down again. Are you okay, or have you got a question?
You did, but it's fine. I think we passed on from there.
Right. I don't see any more questions on COVID. We finished exactly as the way I wanted to. So I'm going to move on to questions on council finance, and Natasha as the deputy leader and cabinet member for finance, and Dawn as our chief finance officer are in the room virtually for any questions. So are there any questions on council finance? Normally you can't stop talking to people about finance. Stephen.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. I wanted to ask about the capital budget, because when we had our last ONS meeting on the budget, we sort of remarked that the gap in the capital budget and the impact on interest is quite significant and going up. It's 38.7 million this year and 43.6 million next year, which next year will be 25% of the entire revenue budget will be taken up by interest payments from the capital budget. I'm just wondering what's our plan for dealing with this and bringing this down, because otherwise, you know, we're just going to end up with more and more of our council day-to-day spending going on interest payments.
Dawn.
Thank you. Yeah, what we're doing, councillor, in terms of the capital programme, there will be an element of the capital that's shown there that is grant funding, and we need to make sure that we adjust for that. But what we are doing is, I think, to be fair, over the last couple of years, is some of the increase that you talk about is the figures that you quote are actually just not interest payments, but what the council's called their minimum revenue provision and the interest payment. So the interest payment is it's about 12 million of that. So I think it's important that we understand that that's two things. That's not just purely capital financing. And what the without blazing people with technicalities, the minimum revenue provision is a sum that we have to set aside from our revenue budget to fund that, and in effect we just use that each year to fund our capital programme. So I think it's just important to understand that's not all interest payments. What we have done for the last couple of years is we've had a very stringent approach to our capital programme. We have tried very hard. We've had some very clear categories of what goes into the capital programme. So it has to be health and safety, has to be revenue generating, etc., to try and really prevent any additional capital financing being added to the budget. And when we set the MTFS for last year, we had a very stringent approach to the capital programme. There was no additional interest put into the budget for the first few years, and a very small, modest sum put in for 23-24. And we will continue. We will continue with that. We look every year in terms of what hasn't been spent from the previous year. Should that capital come out of the budget? So we don't continue with it just rolling forward. So we are very attuned to that fact. And I'd say we're having a very strict approach to the capital programme to prevent those capital financing charges going up over and above what we have to specifically do, for example, for health and safety and such. We will continue with that track, with that approach.
Thank you for that, and apologies for my sloppiness in terms of describing them as interest payments. But I think the point is that these are payments, even though it's not all interest payments. This is, you know, an ever increasing amount of money that has an impact on our revenue budget every year in order to finance the capital budget. I think you called it the capital financing cost in the budget. I mean, I appreciate what you said about making sure we don't add more to it, to that capital debt. But obviously, if we still do nothing, if we still don't add to it, it's still going to go up anyway because of increasing interest and that sort of thing. I mean, I noticed recently, for example, that in one of the recent papers on the modernisation financing, we used capital receipts that were supposed to go in paying down the capital budget from developments at Waxwell Lane and Haslam House. I think it was 5 million to actually use rather than that paying down some of our debt. We've now put that into extra expenditure, and I just want to make sure that we're actually at some point some of these projects are actually just going to pay down our capital debt and actually reduce the impact on our day-to-day revenue spending. And are there any capital projects identified that are actually going to do that?
Do you want me to respond?
Yes, I'll bring it, but I will bring Natasha in as well to answer that point as well.
Do you want to go first, Natasha, or do you want me to answer first?
You can go, Dawn, and then I'll chip in anything else.
I mean, I will make reference to the modernisation funding. We did fund that through some capital receipts, but I think it's very important to remember that we as a council do not get funded for any of our capital expenditure over and above, or any of our initiatives over. We don't get additional funding from them, so we have to find funding internally. And the government have specifically allowed us to use capital flexibilities to fund some of the modernisation that's required from local government. That you know, we as local government cannot, we struggle to find that funding from revenue just within our budget. We don't get additional money for that, and that is a tool that they have allowed us to use. And we do use that tool as a council. We use it very modestly, but we do use that tool, and that is what it is intended to be there for, to help us with transformation, modernisation, without having an impact on our general fund and hence our council tax. So I think that's just helpful to understand that. In terms of council debt, you are quite right. We are very attuned to the debt that the council holds and how we are going to approach to make an inroad into that debt. We have gone down the route of disposing of some properties recently. So I think a report last went to Cabinet in, I think it's about March or April of this year, and those capital receipts that we receive from them are all being banked in terms of how we can use them to repay down our debt. So we constantly do this every year. When we get some capital receipts in, we do naturally use that to fund either some current capital investments, so hence we don't have to increase our borrowing, or we use that to pay that down. We can only pay down our debt as and when those loans become mature, because if we pay them down before then we tend to incur sort of penalty charges. But we are very much attuned to how we can sort of start to make an inroad into that debt. We are starting to look at, when we take on future borrowings, how we do that on a mortgage basis, so we naturally pay it down anyway. And we are looking within the HRA as well. So a number of that debt is linked to our HRA, how we can manage not only just the funding of the finance, but the repayment of the loans as well. So that is something that we are very much looking at. Great.
Natasha, I know you were in the meeting for HSDP, but I think this is your first proper outing in your new role to the Greatest Committee in Harrow. So welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and I'll let you answer Stephen's point.
Thank you for having me. John's pretty much said everything that I had jotted down as well. We speak about this a lot. So that's obviously, as I've taken over this portfolio quite recently, this is sort of, it's one of the things that everybody's got on the top of their minds. I was just going to mention the flexibility of capital as well, and about we're using the money that we have got in the ways that we can spend it where we can. And but like I say, we've started talking about, as much as we can, the long-term plans, even though it's difficult to do because we don't know what the settlements will be by government. But yeah, looking at ways that we can manage and get down debt is of course something that is on every conversation we have, is looking at those numbers and making sure things are balanced at the end of it. But I think Dawn gave a pretty good overview there. Thank you, Dawn, of the various elements that we're looking at.
Great, thank you. I'm going to bring in Sarah and then Jeff.
Thank you. I think maybe in part this might be answered, but I'm just going to ask as well, really, what are the big lessons that we're learning from other councils in financial difficulties and places like Slough, who've already issued a 114 notice?
I'll bring Dawn, and then I think it'll be good to get Natasha in as well on that one.
Okay. I mean, it's a very good question, and to give members assurance whenever there are any reports or anything produced about those councils that are struggling financially, we go through them very thoroughly with Susan as head of internal audit to make sure what are there any points in there for us, what we should and shouldn't be doing. I think, and this is just from a person, I suppose it's from my view as director of finance. I think looking at some of the ones that have happened recently, I think it's perhaps some of the scale at which people have done things. So, for example, if you think about Croydon, there was a lot of concern about Croydon about how much they were borrowing. But once again, it was for borrowing for for commercial investment, but it was at the extent of which they were doing that. So they borrowed over £500 million. Our capital investment, where we have invested in commercial investments, it's been quite minimal, and those commercial investments are returning their returns. So I think it's a quantum. Croydon once again and Northampton used their capital flexibilities, but once again it was a quantum. I think in Croydon they used it to the tune of £70 million. We've used capital flexibilities over the entire life of the project, which is about 5 years, to the tune of about 12 million. So we are using those tools, but we are using them in a very, I would say, responsible and way that we can manage them. So I think for me, we are doing similar things, but it's and I think another thing, for example, on the capital flexibilities, which really got Croydon into trouble, is they were using it for ongoing revenue expenditure. So there was a big criticism about them using that for their social care expenditure. Whereas in Harrow, when we have used those capital flexibilities, as we've explained earlier, we're using it for specific one-off funding for modernisation. So we're not building that money into our general fund account and then having problems the following year when those receipts are not there. So I think I think to be fair to the council, we monitor our revenue incredibly closely. I know, for example, at Croydon, they were doing their revenue monitoring every quarter, every 6 months. We do ours every month, so that that we keep a very tight grip on our numbers. And then the minute that we have something that looks like it's deviating from the budget, we're very much onto that and we can keep track of that. There were issues about setting up companies, and once again very much at Croydon, issues about setting up companies, but once again their companies they set up were very large when we have set companies up, albeit from the company of the HSDP, but I think that's fundamentally different. The trading structures that we have done as a council have been very minimal, so therefore our exposure to risk is considerably less. So I think, just before, I know I can see other people wanting to come in, I think for me, we have done, I'll be very honest, we have done some of the things that the other councils have done, but we have done it in a very modest and responsible way, whereas I think sometimes with the quantum, the other councils, it's been very different.
Thanks, Don. I'm going to bring Sean in to finish an officer response, and then I think we'll bring Natasha in for a political response. Sean.
So I think, just building on Dawn's point, really, I think that certainly from my point of view and my experience, I think that how I would describe Harrow's finances is that they are very tight, and they're very tight in a number of ways. They're very tight in terms of the fact we don't have very much, but they're also very tightly managed. So that doesn't mean that we don't have big challenges, but we don't, I think, have big exposure. That's how I would describe it. And I think that what you see with basically the councils who tend to get themselves in the most trouble are people who try risky things to get themselves out of trouble, I think, is one thing. And similarly, don't necessarily understand where their finances are, if you see what I mean. I don't think our finances are good, but we know where they are and have a very tight grip on them. So I think it's a different type of risk. So I don't think there's any risk at all of Harrow Council going bankrupt. Far from it. I think the risk is that we control the finances so tightly that unfortunately we'll know about it, and that will have a big impact on services because we will know something about it and we'll take action. It's a different type of problem, I suppose I would describe it as.
Great, thank you. Natasha.
Thank you all. Yeah, I think the word that Dawn used, responsible, is the term that I was going to say as well. And obviously I think all of us councils have a good overview of where the finances are in Harrow, or where they aren't, so to speak, and know about how much we don't get as well as how much we do. And I think, yeah, the whole concept of just being complete on top of them. Dawn and the team know every budget line inside out and backwards, and I'm learning more and more and more of them as I go at the moment, trying to get my head around everything completely. And I think that is very much where we're at. Other councils, as we see, I'm constant, I've got various things set up now to get alerts of when things are happening, and we know a lot of them having to now go to the government to say we need your help before they even get there because of the pickle they've got themselves into, so to speak. But getting to know the team more as I have, I don't see that it's not going to be a problem here, because the handle on it is so tight, as Sean says. And I think sometimes that can be people asking to spend more money on things, but we want to spend more money because we want to look after people and we want to improve services, and that's where the flexibility comes in, and that's where looking at where we can use budget for things like modernisation and improving services, we will try to do that. But the team, Dawn, is that we're not going to be in a position to do things that are going to get us into financial difficulties. That's the worst case scenario, and we just cannot allow that to happen. So it's not easy, but I'm very, very confident that it's maintained and it's kept as it should be.
Great, thank you. I know Graham wants to come in. It will be, I no doubt, a very short point.
It's a very short point, really. I think we've been quite honest with people for over the past few years, and have had taken some very difficult decisions around how services are delivered. You know, as we lost funding around a whole range of things, 97% of our revenue support grant is one we use. We also lost £800,000 from our TfL funding grant for roads and infrastructure. All those sort of things we've managed to cope with, and a lot of it has been by putting up council tax each year. Most of the councils that are suffering financial difficulties because they haven't taken those difficult choices at the time, they had large reserves that they've drawn down on over the past couple of years, and they also frozen council tax. And and I think we've got a very low business rate, so we don't get that much business rates compared to other councils. But I think it is that prudence of spending and sort of managing it very tightly has managed us to deliver, get through COVID in that sense better than probably some other people have. And we know, and we're doing a lot of work differently. We're known as a very low cost, high performing council, and I don't think that's without any sort. There's a lot of truth in that as well when you go through the different services.
Great, thank you, Graham. Jeff.
Yeah, but basically my question was sort of really revolved around what happened at Slough. I think Sean and Dawn have actually covered really what I was going to ask in their previous answers anyway, so thanks you. So the thing I was really worried about is, you know, were we going to provide ongoing services, essential services, sorry, on an ongoing basis? And so I think Sean and Dawn have covered that. So
okay, great. We will move on to Dan. I think we lost that.
I think you keep going on and off with mute, Dan.
Someone that's desperately hoping for in-person meetings to appear.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, I'm having a lot of lag on my Surface Pro, and I feel like I'm on the space shuttle or something. So my question was just around, we heard in the previous item around social care becoming under increased pressure, and thoughts that might increase over this winter. And given the lack of a long-term funding settlement in the Health and Social Care White Paper, I just wanted to ask yourself, Natasha and Dawn, how confident are we that the council can meet the financial pressure that will have over this year and the coming years?
I'll start with Dawn and then move on to Natasha.
I mean, this is very, very challenging. It's one that, you know, it's no surprise to everybody that this is one of the biggest pressures against our budget. We do get, and it's the one that we lobby against the most for additional funding. I think in terms of confidence, in terms of how we meet the pressures, I think we have to meet those pressures. And you know, we've already explained how we're very, our monitoring is very tight to make sure that we can afford those pressures. So, for example, in this year's budget, when we got our additional social care funding last year, we actually only got just over £300,000 additional for adult social care services. So it was a very, very small amount. So the council had to put in, I think it was just short of £4 million worth of growth. So that's in the budget for this year. That budget is managed very, very tightly by our adult social care colleagues to make sure that they can either manage within that budget, or if there is inevitable pressures, then it's reported very early and we have to manage that across the council. And that is what we are doing this year. So confident in terms of we have to meet the pressures, because we can't not meet those pressures. And obviously we're very, so we'd have to just all pitch in across the piece as to how we do that. But this is getting very, very difficult for us. We have an element of growth in our budget next year, but demand is going up in that service. We will have to wait till our settlement to see what we will actually get in terms of additional grant for next year. But we are very unlikely to hear that until probably December time. We might start to get some word out in November, but it's probably going to be very, very late. There are issues around, we will not know as well, and there are very difficult issues around increasing council tax, but once again, it's very unlikely that we will hear until very late in the financial year whether councils are allowed to put any form of precept on their council tax, which the precept is specifically for social care. So a lot of unknowns around social care. We know it's an increasing pressure, but being realistic, we will have to meet the pressure whatever it is.
Sean.
Yeah, I was going to make a similar point to Dawn, but just sort of expand on it. The challenges of being a unitary authority that has the responsibility for children's and adult social care, which has personal statutory duties relating to individuals, is you have to meet those needs. It's other parts of the budget, universal services, etc., where you have discretion. And the reality is that adults and children's social care effectively take up a greater and greater proportion of the budget over time, and universal and targeted service takes up a smaller proportion of the budget. And effectively, increasingly, council tax is used to pay for adult and children's social care for a relatively small number of residents, because that's the funding model that the government has put in place for funding social care for councils.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Are there any? I think those answers were full. I don't know if Natasha or Graham want to add anything more to that. Natasha.
I will. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think my point to put it is it's just a non-negotiable. That is, at the base level, it's our responsibility to care for people and make sure people that need supports are supported. And like Sean says, more and more of the budget is being just spent on those people, whether they're adults or children, and everything else has to be paid for too in some way, but that's where we have to make decisions, and they're very tough decisions. But social care, regardless of who they are, and if it's a small number of people that are taking up a large part of the budget, that's our jobs, and that's what we have to do. So that we will find a way. Whatever it takes, the most basic level, but that's what we have to look after people, and we'd love to do all the other things as well that people would like to see happening. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of people, until we get in that situation and somebody that needs that help and support, it's difficult for people to see, because unless you've got somebody in your own family or you've got a neighbour that needs help, it's hard to grasp how much goes into that unless you work in a certain industry where you're providing that support and help as well. So it's one of those questions where it sometimes goes very unseen, but it's done and it will be done. And yeah, there's nothing else to it really. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move us on. The next area is equalities. I mean, we have spent quite a bit of time on this already, so I don't feel like you need to ask any questions, but I thought we'd put this in there just in case there was any follow-up from the earlier presentation. Does anyone have anything they would like to know? Okay, I'm going to move us on to performance and a specific area.
Sorry, Session,
yeah,
Jean. Just to say, it was really brilliant, the discussion we had, etc. And what would be really useful is to have regular reviews or updates about the other, protected characteristics that we talked about. So if we build that into our thinking.
Absolutely, we'll make sure we add that to the plan. So the next area we want to look at is performance of the council. Generally, this is just a general question if people have performance issues. And we had a particular request through the leadership on looking at consultation. So these are the two areas I want to look at now. Are there any questions on performance, council performance related or consultation? Stephen.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. Just wanted to ask about customer service and sort of people's ability to contact the council. And we're a number of us as councillors are getting increasing inquiries from residents who, for one reason or another, aren't able to contact the council about various issues. And obviously there's been a move from contacting, in many areas, contacting by telephone onto the web. But there are particular that doesn't necessarily cover everything all the time. So sometimes there might be people that want to raise a particular issue, but for whatever reason that is not covered on a particular web form, and there's no other way to raise that issue, or they might not be able to find the particular form they need because they might be hidden. It might be hidden away somewhere or difficult to find. That sometimes there's technical issues, particularly in a couple of recent cases in people trying to raise council tax issues, or just people that aren't able necessarily to for one reason or another don't have the ability or the equipment to be able to use the web in the way that many of us do. Particularly if they're elderly or have some sort of disability or something like that. So what can you do to address this and actually help people who struggle to contact the council be able to contact the council in a better way?
Okay, I'll bring Sean and then I'll bring Graham in, but Sean.
So I do think that COVID has exacerbated some of these challenges, Stephen. I don't think there's any doubt about that, because I would say when we were operating pre-COVID, there was probably actually quite a lot of what I would describe as assisted digital. So whilst we haven't actually, I don't think, Graham will correct me if I'm wrong, I don't actually think we have in the last year or 18 months actually put if anything, more online only than was previously existed. I think that actually there were plans to do more, but effectively we didn't implement them and have actually there are some budget pressures because we haven't done so because of not wanting to do that because of COVID. But there were actually quite a lot of staff who used to effectively help people face to face, particularly at the Civic Centre, if they were not able to themselves access the services that were only online. That has been more challenging during COVID, and I think what's also happened as well, again understandably, is that we have been hit with very lumpy amounts of demand, so that for periods of time people, during lockdowns and whatever, people haven't progressed issues and then everything's come at once, and I think that has sometimes sort of overwhelmed the system a bit. You may or may not know this, and we are not actively going hell for leather to promote this at the moment because we're wanting to try and get it right first. One of the things that we are doing is to try and expand the number of access points through our libraries, and we've just started a new pilot in Greenhill Library in order to be able to assist the number of places where people can get support and access council services, because I am conscious that there is a lot of, this is what I was saying, there is a lot of demand at the moment because there's a lot of backlog. I think, again, to be honest, I think it will take some time for that to shake its way out of the system because of COVID. I think that some of it will settle down naturally. Some of it will get better as there is more resource available face to face. And some of that is being looked at as part of how we might provide other places to provide access. And it's an ongoing challenge for all of the reasons that I've said. And I'm fairly close to it because if people can't get an answer, they normally email me.
Before we go on, I just want to draw people's attentions to Dan's declaration that he's made in the meeting chat. So just so everyone's seen that. Stephen, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that response. I think with respect, it's not. I don't think we can always just blame COVID for these things. I mean, obviously, I appreciate there are pressures on the council because of COVID, but I think that there are certain things, that could be done, that don't necessarily affect COVID. For example, somebody contacted me recently because they had a damaged food waste bin, and they weren't able to. They tried to report it online, and they found that you can report a damaged green or blue bin, but you can't report a damaged food waste bin. I don't see why that seems like a ridiculous thing that just makes life difficult. And then there was no way for them to actually speak to somebody to report that. So they came to me. I had somebody else recently that they were trying to they're trying to move house and they're trying to sort out the council tax, and they had a problem. The system was just not accepting their details on the website, and they couldn't speak to somebody to resolve it. So that could have been sorted out without necessarily affecting COVID pressures. So I just think it would be, obviously I understand, we all understand there's COVID issues, but I think it would be helpful if some of these things could still be addressed where they can be addressed and where it's possible to address them within the current constraints.
Great.
Sorry.
I'll bring Graham, because I know I'll bring Graham in and then I'll bring Sean back in. Graham.
Yes, this is an important area. Over the years, we've managed to convert a lot of people moving to stuff online where they wanted to be in the first place, to be able to access something online rather than phoning up. And there's thousands of transactions done every day through the online portals. The website was recently updated, and with that, a lot of it is automated through as well. So some of the transactions before used to have to be sort of come through as an email. Now they're automated through the whole system and are dealt with. But we know that there's some people who cannot access, through the website themselves. So that's why we've got Councillor Sue Anderson, who's leading on part of that piece of work around to be able to make contact through for those who can't access through online mediums. Some people actually just while we're trialing the library sites, is because people don't want to always go to the Civic Centre. The Civic Centre has been closed for months and it wasn't a problem coming through at that stage. But some people want a local place to go to where they can just sort of be helped along the way to be able to do some of this stuff. There's been a problem recently because it's the same every year in around June, July, is the council tax where people are behind and haven't paid it. The letters go out and they get a letter telling them that if you don't pay it, you're going to court. So you always get people trying to phone up at those stages, and it's end up as a backlog on the automated systems where people have emailed through and they hadn't processed those as quickly as possible. But we mustn't also forget that during COVID itself, the telephone system we had in before, the CRM systems that were in place, were migrated over to the 8x8 app, so people can access it from home on the screens themselves, and they can increase demand. If there's increased demand come through, and Jonathan Milburn sort of encouraged people to sort of join in and take some of those calls. But they've also been doing thousands of outbound calls throughout COVID as well, to make sure people are okay, and people who normally contact and they've lost contact with. I think it might be worth, if you Jonathan Milburn and Councillor Sue Anderson can probably do a really good presentation around this piece of work, because it is important that we give everyone the opportunity to contact the council when they need to. But I'll just point out, some people, they phone up, and when you get through, the person answering the phone, well, all they do is they just put it in the website themselves. There's nothing else that they're going to do. They're not going to phone up some crew and say, quick, get back and divert your lorry round to pick the bin up. It goes through the same system as if you were doing it yourself from home.
Thanks. Sean, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to, so I was just to sort of go back on Councillor Greek's point. I do agree in part that there are things that we could do better, and absolutely take that. And you probably don't want to hear some of the conversations I have with staff about things that they should have done better that they didn't, because I'm pretty challenging around some of that, because I think some of it is about attitude and culture as well as it is about process. So I'm not be the first person not to say that there aren't areas that we can improve in. But for example, all the staff involved in council tax, business rates, all of those sorts of things are the same people who have paid out thousands of business grants. And that has, for a whole range of reasons, we've had to take people off other activity to process tens of millions of pounds of business grants, quite rightly, to Harrow residents, and which they needed due to COVID. Yes, and some of that has been done on overtime, but across the council and across the Ps, there are things that could and would have been done better if people were not doing COVID-related tasks. So I just think it's both. I think it's important that we recognise that.
Absolutely, Jeff.
Right, I've got a couple of questions regarding sort of some consultations with the house surface. Is this an appropriate time to bring it up?
Absolutely.
Right, well, I'd really like to know what consultation the house surface have had with the council over a couple of issues. One, as you may know, they're looking at moving the services at Mount Vernon, at one of the major oncology hospitals in the area, to various sites across London. I just wondered if they'd had any consultation with the council on the plans, because they seem to be very much at a fait accompli. And the other one, I suppose, is as well the transfer of St Mary's to Central Middlesex. So have the house service had any consultation with the council on that, and if so, can I ask what it was?
Sean.
So I think the answer on both questions is there has been no formal consultation with the council on either of those two issues, and I think technically there wouldn't be a requirement on those two issues for the health service to consult the council. Certainly in terms of Mount Vernon, to use the health service vernacular, there has been a fair amount of information and engagement in terms of sharing with the council, if you like, and stakeholders more generally, what the plans are. I can't quite remember, and Graham might remember, for some strange reason it's the East of England NHS who are the actual commissioner of Mount Vernon, which takes it even further removed from what happens locally. And my understanding is that in terms of the West Middlesex, my understanding is that at the moment is a temporary COVID merit measure, not a permanent consultation about a permanent service change. And so in the sense that we have had discussions with the NHS about what they've put in place in order to manage COVID pathways for certain services, yes, they have engaged with us around that, but because it's not a permanent service change, not consultation as such.
Right, which one's that?
The second one. So is it Central Mids?
Central Mids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Graham,
Right.
Graham, I don't know whether
do you want to add to that?
Yes, Sean's quite right. The they wanted to free up Northwick Park Hospital to be the emergency centre for London for COVID patients going through. And so they moved the electric care on cancer pathways into central mids to make sure that they could test properly and make sure they could control the spread of the virus if it got into the hospital stream. It would be too much of a risk for everyone turning up at Northwick Park Hospital on the same bus sort of approach. They're all temporary measures as they're trying to clear the backlog. I think there's about 7 million nationally of operations that are outstanding. But the update's going to be coming through from the chief medical nurse. I can't remember his name. Carly, is it McCauley? Or James?
Well,
yeah, chief medical officer, nurse for London is coordinating a lot of it. But we coordinate between the ICS, which is North West London's 8 boroughs, and they have been moving some operations around to fit in also with staff availability as well. The risk we've raised with them is about the travel implications if they try moving people into somewhere like Ealing Hospital, which is probably a bit more harder for us to get to from Harrow.
Well, they were already referring you to Stevenage and God knows where, because I've been to them. So, but, I mean, certainly the engagement, if you want to call it that they've had. Everything's really very much been presented as a fait accompli. So,
can I just say, Jeff, that there is an ongoing consultation around Mount Vernon Hospital because that covers. It's been run nationally because it comes under the national umbrella, even though it's owned by the East of England Health Trust. It's very similar to Airfield. It's not owned by the health trusts around London, so we get limited input into some of this. But they are looking for people to sit on the patient panel if you want to volunteer.
Cheers, Gail. I'll talk to you about that later.
Jean.
Thank you. Can I sort of broaden the issue around consultation, guys? This is ongoing, as you can appreciate, but one of the things that prompted my concern around consultation is that when we were first looking at the HSDP, so that's a little while back, I asked a simple question of, was anyone being consulted on this, anyone from the community or user groups, etc. And I was told at that time, and people will remember because it was formally said, that the residents panel had been talked to several times regarding HSDP. So my question to the then portfolio holder was, so who's on this residents panel? And one, it was 25 people, if my memory serves, and 2, it was the same 25 people who have been on the same residents panel for yonks. So that was one issue, and we've had to press on that a couple of times at Scrutiny. I have had some response from that from Alex, who's actually sort of looking into the panel. But I think what I'm more concerned about, and we're more concerned about, is how, as a council, we approach consultation. Why is it again, people come to us, our residents, and say things like, well, before we knew it, it was a fait accompli, which is sort of what Jeff was saying about NHS. Before, why didn't you ask us all? Why have you left us out? And so there's a whole mess around consultation and indeed communication. So you can't divide one from the other, can you? And I pressed for this to be included on our work programme for that very reason, because it is messy, but it's not that difficult to actually take a view, which is bigger than a residents panel, and say, what can we be doing? How can we involve people? I was very impressed earlier with the work that the HR guys have done internally. Why the hell can't we have a better view of what consultation is about? It's not about just telling people. It's actually about presenting things to people so they understand it, take it in, see how it affects them, if they do or don't approve, or they want to actually feed back into that. So we do have a terrible reputation on consultation. I'm sorry to tell you, Sean, but we do. Any ideas?
Sean and then Graham.
So I would say that I think there are. So interestingly, Jean, I think you know this. You know I don't agree with your assessment around this in terms of the HSDP. I think I've made my views pretty clear that I think that, the council has engaged very extensively, and it's very much the case that the sort of strategic level of understanding about what the council's proposals and plans are around the HSDP, I think are well known and well understood. I completely accept that there are many people who may not agree with them, but I think that's different from the consultation, and that actually the real consultation very much starts around the planning applications. I suspect we're not going to agree on that, but that's my view. I think that, and I will skate over this briefly, because I don't want to reopen, wounds that have now somewhat healed. The LTN process was very difficult. It was very clear that, and I'll give you my objective, balanced view. I think the council was dealt a very difficult hand by government in a difficult situation, but then didn't handle it very well. So I think that, there was challenges on a whole number of sides there in terms of how that was done, and I completely agree that, it was a long way from the council's finest hour in terms of that whole process. But I also think as well that there was a situation where people everywhere were asked to implement something in a way that hadn't been done previously. So I think that there were mitigating circumstances around that. And I think there are examples where things haven't been handled brilliantly. But I suppose I would also ask for a degree of balance. I mean, I think we have communicated incredibly well, both internally and externally, with the public and the community around COVID. I think the information that we've given, the way we've engaged people, the way we've worked with the voluntary and community sector, the way we've worked with schools, the NHS, has been pretty exemplary. So, yeah, I'll take a few blows on that, Jean, and I think you've got, I think you can give a number of examples where we haven't been brilliant, but I think I'm just trying to chuck a bit of balance back. I think there are some good examples at the same time.
Let me come back to clarify before Graham comes in, because it was around consultation rather than communication. If you see, there is an element of difference there, and it's not just about the big picture stuff. But there is the thing about the residents panel, which I know Alex is taking on. But there are things that happen in our wards where people notice after they've happened. And we're not just talking about LTNs. We're talking about planning permissions, change of use, CPZs and all that sort of thing, where people think they're being taken as fools. And so it might not be the big picture stuff that you and I are talking about tonight, but it is significant in terms of the reputation of the council. Forget which party we belong to. It is significant, and if we're providing a service, then we should be providing a diamond service, not one that we think we can get away with. And it shouldn't be anything to do with numbers of staff. It should be the way we approach it. So whilst I do accept some of this discussion we've had, sorry, go on.
I'm completely with you, Jean, that there are a number of ways in which culturally we could do things better that aren't about money or capacity. I'm not taking issue with that.
Okay, thank you.
Graham, did you want to come in before? And then I'll bring Stephen in.
Yes, this is another one that's in Councillor Sue Anderson's area, that she deals, keeps an eye out on consultations to make sure they're properly done. Our obligations for
my shadow
reduced by under the Localism Act in 2007, which sets out that it needs to be proportionate to what we need to do. So for a planning application on an extension, you wouldn't consult the whole borough, you just do the neighbours. Where before, previously, we went over that and used to do the whole street near enough. We don't do that anymore because there is quite a significant cost to doing that. Well, I would say though that I'm surprised you said, Jean, that ward councillors didn't know about planning applications, because
I didn't say that.
Every week.
I did not say that. I didn't say that.
Wards,
You can take that one back, Mr. Heads.
Right, we'll keep moving on.
We'll keep moving on. But the thing is, on consultations, the consultation portal is well used. People can sign up for alerts, and more people do so. And on some of the bigger consultations that take place, we actually highlight through the My Arrow account. Yeah, I do accept that more of it is being taken place online, but as Sue's organised, on some occasions we have sent letters out to a wider community when it has got that wider community impact, where we need to sort of make sure that people are aware of what the thing is about. But the consultations is, you can do, it's got to be proportionate to what we want to do. But going back to the HSTP, that's been running for about 5 years. Now I know the so-called that panel was notified some time ago, but it's been wider than that as well. We've got the Wheelstone Action Group that meets on a regular basis, and that brings in about 50 people who are connected and who refer things back out to the community and feedback through those proposals. So it's not that people aren't aware. It's probably because there's so much information going out, you can't be aware of everything.
Yeah, I think there's a way we can help people shift to using the things you referred to in terms of the portals and so on as well. But I do take your point, but once we've made that giant leap, it's a big step in a way, a big ask, if you like. Once we've done that, people will understand. So thank you.
I'm gonna move us on, Jean.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much, Sachin.
Yep, thank you very much. Just in terms of ward councillor consultation, can I ask you to recommit to that, because we've noticed, particularly in the past year, but also a little bit before that as well, that there's been a number of cases, on all sorts of issues where whereas in the past we might have been informed and consulted on things as ward councillors, it doesn't always seem to be happening now. I mean, we recently discovered, my colleagues and I recently discovered a site where a whole host of decisions have been made over a number of years without any reference to ward councillors. And we also find increasingly that when we try to get updates on local projects and local sites, we get stonewalled. We're often not given the information in a timely manner, and then we later find out that actually that information did exist and other people were told and we weren't told. So can I just ask you to look at this, and I know this is something that you have good intentions on, but it doesn't always translate into reality. And can I ask you to look at that, please?
Sure.
Yes, I'm happy to do so. I think that and again, I'll give a slightly different bit of sort of COVID context, Stephen, on this one. I don't think this hasn't happened because of COVID. I think what happens is that one of the things that I do is I nag people to make sure that they've engaged appropriately with ward members, and because it is one of the things that officers are not as good at as they ought to be. I probably have had less capacity to do the nagging in the last 12 months than previously. So absolutely, I'm more than happy to put re-nagging people at the top of my things to do list, because it is important.
Although I suspect we don't want our chief executive spending his precious time nagging people. If we can get it mainstreamed, rather than having the chief executive nag things, that's probably better for everyone.
I think all I would say, Sachin, in my 30+ years of experience, you can try and mainstream this as often as you want, but if you don't have somebody at the top of the organisation reminding officers to consult ward members, it doesn't happen as well as you'd want it to.
Can I make an observation, Sachin?
Yes, correct.
This is on Sue's agenda, because she gets quite annoyed if people haven't been consulted.
She bent my ear about it as well.
Yes, and we'll raise it quite vehemently with officers, and we have delayed reports because ward councillors haven't been consulted. So sometimes it is due to change of staff. Sometimes it's when things are moving quite quickly that they lose track of who's been consulted. But if you've got any specific issues, if you email Sue, I'm sure she'll investigate for you.
Thank you.
Chair.
So I was just going to say, it probably won't interest members, but quite often over our breakfast or dinner table, we have a conversation about consultations the portfolio holder has where consultations have gone out, and the first she's heard of it is after it's gone out, which is not much use. But I would say it does seem a bit, or she feels it is getting better, but it is certainly far from perfect.
Okay. Steve, is that an old hand you've got up?
Yeah, it's the same hand, but
okay, great. I'm going to move us on now to borough plan or general strategic direction of the council, if people have questions on that. No, I will kick us off with just a question around a short update on where we are with the plans for the borough plan, for either Sean or Graham, whoever wants to answer it.
So I suppose for me, Sachin, there's probably two aspects to this. So we will be reporting in the autumn about progress against delivery on the key priorities within the borough plan. And I think on a practical basis, we have actually made some fairly good progress on a number of areas, despite both the challenges of delivering certain things during COVID and the capacity that COVID has taken out of the system. I think that the bigger strategic question, and we are actually having a conversation about this with the CSB and Cabinet on Wednesday this week, is how realistic and in what way are we going to be able to restart or not in the next few months the engagement process around the borough plan, and secondly, within again the context of priorities and capacity, what are the areas that we feel we should prioritise most within the priorities given the resources available. So I think rightly I can't give you the answer to that question today, because that's going to be subject to political input via the Cabinet, sort of initially informally and then more strategically during the autumn. But I guess what I would say is we're trying to rescue as much as we reasonably can, given the ability to do that and the capacity available through COVID, and also where we might need to refocus, certainly in the short to medium term, some of the priorities. So, for example, you know, the context around employment, the context around poverty, the context around health, the context around educational catch-up, etc., has all changed quite significantly over the past 6 to 12 months, and I think we need to factor that into what we're able to do, certainly from you know, the next financial year, when hopefully the capacity and practical impacts of COVID are more managed, so there is more resource to deal with that.
Okay, Graham, did you want to add anything?
Not a lot really, because it's quite a challenging time, isn't it? The person leading on it, on the borough plan in a sense, director wise, is Alex, who's tied up with the vaccination programme amongst everything else that he's had to do. And so, you know, you're trying to find the time to fit some of these things in. I think we've got the priorities that we've gone through over the 18 months ago now, isn't it? Nearly 2 years ago. And I think they're sort of, we know what they are, and we work, and as people going through making decisions, they're conscious of them. You saw that earlier on from the equalities report, the waste and milers moving stuff through and Tracy's moving stuff through the council, that they're conscious of them being there. But how we could actually move it much faster is the challenge that Sean's just set out.
Great. Stephen.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Something that is supposed to be a council priority, I think, but we don't really hear much about is overcrowding. Obviously that's an issue that's come particularly to the fore during COVID for two reasons. Firstly, because there seems to be quite a strong correlation between overcrowded areas and COVID hotspots, but also because now, moving on from that, if we're going to be seeing more people working from home, there's going to be a bigger demand. There's going to be demand for larger homes, and we're already seeing people in smaller homes actually struggle to sell them more because people want larger homes. So is there any work being done to actually address this issue and respond to, firstly, the overall need for overcrowding, but also some of these changing trends and how that might be reflected in ongoing work and in planning policy and in things like the council building programmes and that sort of thing?
So I suppose, you know, the short strategic answer is that clearly one of the core aims of the HSDP is to generate a significant number of additional homes for Harrow residents. That's clearly part of a number of other regeneration programmes, such as you know, Grange Farm, such as the developments that exist in Harrow. I mean, Harrow continues to be a growth area, and you know, and we know that these things are by their nature controversial, but we need to build more homes, and we need to build more affordable homes. I mean, and that's clearly part of the council's plans. I guess there are a whole range of different reasons for household sizes and types. You know, the Harrow has quite a significant number of multi-generational households at one end of the spectrum, which is a particular trait of a number of our diverse communities. We also have lots of challenges around the hidden homelessness of people who are sofa surfing and sharing with friends and family, etc., which is partly about what the challenge is. And I think strategically, and you know, unless we significantly increase the number of homes that we have in the borough, and that's the case in London in general, that issue will manage. I suspect, Stephen, that you're right, that ultimately through the broader planning system, there will probably be some changes to design, ventilation, all those sorts of things that will come about as a result of COVID. And I think if there are any specific aspects of that, the opportunities to address that will come through the local plan, which is going out to consultation at the moment.
Great. Graham, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up that last point from Sean about the local plan. Now we've been targeted quite a big number of properties to build over the next 10 years. I know it's reduced down from the 12,000 they had originally down to 8,000 over 10 years. But if you go by the multiplier with the government saying about need, then we need probably about 2,500 properties a year. The trouble, well, it's not a problem, but the thing about Harrow is this is protected green space, and if we don't want to build on that, I know there's an argument about that. There's some places, parts of the green belt you can build on, but most of it we can't. And we don't have those brownfield sites that other councils have. So the only opportunity really is to go higher, to fit those in. So the Harrow plan that's going through out to consultation in October, we'll be looking at a lot of these sort of things around intensification zones, places where we've got to protect the low-lying levels of suburban housing, and also to look at other opportunity areas. But it is a challenge that we go through the consultation process of the borough plan, which is talks about all those issues that you're just talking about. But with overcrowding itself, we couldn't really, enforcement team couldn't really go around and throw people out on the street in the middle of COVID. First thing, you couldn't be evicted, but if we'd tackled the landlord, then you know they would have been homeless, and we have had quite a few people placed in the hotels. We've now, I remember back in 2006, we had In 2006, we had 14 people in temporary accommodation, or 14 families in bed and breakfast temporary accommodation. Now it's over 1,000 families, and trying to find somewhere for those people to live is quite a challenge. Also, when you look at the ONS surveys that took place, the 10-year challenge, our estimate was that we had 8,000 Eastern Europeans living in Harrow. So far, over 30,000 just from Romania have registered for settled status. So although a lot of people are leaving the borough, there's still quite, I don't think the figures are actually a true telling of what we got in the borough itself. But also the final one was the enforcement team was actually ensuring we're going around all the businesses and high streets to ensure that the COVID regulations were being followed a lot of the time, and they were working like the 24-hour shifts, are going out even right up to midnight sort of thing. So it meant the check on some of the properties has been scaled back slightly, but they've been going back out since I think it was from April. They've been started to target some of these properties. Specifically the ones that were significantly overcrowded with, illegally overcrowded or unlicensed HMOs. And there's quite a few that are going through the legal system at the moment, but it is quite a challenging process to actually deal with some of these things in the short term.
So thank you. If I can just quickly follow up on that. I mean, I was driving. I appreciate your answers. I was driving more really about, rather than the enforcement issue, more the sort of demand and supply issue. And in terms of making sure that where possible we deliver sufficient numbers, we build sufficient numbers of larger homes with more bedrooms, because obviously making sure we build sufficient numbers of homes is one thing, but making sure we're building enough of the right type of home that meets demand is also important, and it's also important to be alive to changing trends and making sure what we build is important, and particularly on the HSDP sites where we've got opportunities to have quite a lot of influence on what can be built. I just want to make sure that is on somebody's radar and is going to be addressed, and the sort of homes that we will see coming forward on some of those schemes there'll at least be some reflection on that to make sure that what we're providing sufficient numbers of larger family homes, so that families can come off the waiting list and find homes in the borough. And also just to point out as well, that is also particularly when it comes to larger social housing, it's actually a London Plan requirement now that boroughs address this.
Absolutely, and I mean, I think the obviously the advantage of doing this with weights is that the market will drive to meet the need and demand.
Yes, can just say as well that we did negotiate with the Mayor of London and the Secretary of State. The reason we reduced our number down from 14,000 down to 8,000 was because they'd set us up as predominantly 1-bedroom accommodation. We moved that into 2- and 3-bedroom accommodation, so the size and bulk is probably still the same, but we just managed to move some of that around slightly. But it is this fact that on our housing target list at the moment, even when people found using the legislation we got at the moment that's sitting there, you could be over. You need 2 more bedrooms before you're deemed as being overcrowded. That's under legislation, so we're trying to move harder. But I would say that over the last few years we have started a lot. Apart from the Grange Farm estate, there's lots of other properties, 2- and 3-bedroom properties that have been built in Harrow through the HRA, and there's loads in the pipeline to come through on the infill programme went through a cabinet report. I think there's about 650 going through there. So it does give us the larger size accommodation that you're talking about.
Brilliant. I seem to be joined by other Yimbys like me that are desperate to build lots of homes. That's good to hear. We've kind of merged. Well, we should be building. It's very good that we want to build affordable housing. Hopefully, we can get to policy compliant in our own developments very, very soon. We merged kind of the last 2 areas on the borough plan HSDP into one. So I'm going to open up for any other questions on HSDP related matters. I just wonder if we can have an update. At the last meeting, We discussed the all-male board. Sean said he heard from us, he heard our comments, but the papers published for Cabinet still had an all-male board, so I wonder if we can have an update on that.
Conversations are taking place offline, Chair, and it's on the list of things to do.
Good. Right. Jean, you're muted. Yeah.
Sorry, mine is the continuing ask around safeguarding and security for people around in terms of the accommodation strategy, guys. I know it's been taken on board, but I'm still haven't seen, if you like, evidence of how that might be working in the environment for women, men, whether they're staff or whether they're councillors or whether they're residents coming to meetings. People will have to feel safe, but also they have to be safe. You know, we know now that Sarah Everard's murderer has now admitted it, and he was a policeman. So, you know, we really have to be fairly certain about what we offer. It's not just women, what we offer people in terms of safety, security, and overall safeguarding in terms of mostly night times, but it's not just night times, is it? It can be any time, late afternoon, early evening, finishing late, whatever it might be. How are we approaching that? I'm not expecting a complete answer, Sean, but we've been going at this for quite a while now, and I don't feel necessarily as a committee we've actually had much of a response so far.
So I don't think, you know, I'm not sure I can say a great deal more than I've said and others have said on a previous occasion, because to be fair, there's only 1 week that's passed since the last time we had the discussion. And at that meeting, I set out in quite a lot of detail all of the factors that we will consider when the Civic Centre is built in 2025, and the measures that we will take in order to take appropriate risk assessments when we move into forward drive next year. I mean, I can, as I did last time, I can, you know, effectively to sort of speculate on all of the types of measures we could take. You know, we will look at lighting, we will do risk assessments for members of staff. We'll make sure that if there are people who are concerned about their ability to park close to the building, we'll prioritise those people for the parking spaces. If there are issues or risks about where we need to do things specifically relating to an individual's personal safety in terms of providing them with transport, etc., we will do that, all of which we do now. I don't think that at this stage, as I say, given the fact that we don't even have a planning permission yet for a civic centre, we don't have a design for a civic centre, we don't have a layout for what the square in Wealdstone will look like, all of those following things, I can offer anything other than we will do what we always do under those circumstances and make those assessments at that point in time.
Well, we can only do what we do at Scrutiny and ask to see evidence of that thinking, because you're quite right, you do come along and you say the right things, and I'm not doubting you at all, but we need to, like you have any other strategy, this is a strategy that needs to be presented and adopted. There will be things undergo and, you know, supporting that strategy.
And I think what I'm saying to you, Jean, is that it would not be possible to go any further than I'm going now at this point in time. Because there is not yet a design, there is not yet a layout, there is not yet an assessment about who will be working in the building and how the building will work. The building will not be built and operating for another 4 years.
Okay, I mean, the one thing, Sean, I think we need to state and have very clear is the statement of intent around safeguarding, and because it was ignored entirely at the beginning of this process. And now we're not ignoring it, so that's brilliant. But that sort of statement of intent, and it's not, it's like any other thing to do with protected characteristics, whatever. Yeah. If you don't say it, it's not there to be considered. If you see what I mean, I'm not asking for full-blown plans. I'm asking for that real statement to add to the rest of it in terms of what we're aiming to do regarding the new civic centre.
And I think we've done that, and I think we've also said as well that clearly as and when we move to forward drive, we will do the appropriate assessments relating to that as we would do for any new building in terms of risk assessments and staff consultation.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you for that. I see no other questions. We've stayed we stayed within the hour and a half, so can I thank everyone for that. I'm going to draw us to a close and thank officers and members of the cabinet for taking questions. I do want to highlight, I don't normally highlight specific people. I want to, the answers that Dawn gave today were absolutely fantastic, and I think specifically the questions that the answers Dawn gave around the other councils that have had Section 114 notice were brilliant and really showed the work the council doing. Really shows that how lucky we are to have you, Dawn. So thank you. Thank you for doing. I tend not to do that for individual officers, but I think give the answers you gave, I think deserved and warranted those comments. So on that note, can I thank everyone? Can I thank everyone for coming today? We meet again on 14th of September after the summer break. Stephen, did you want to come in?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just very quickly, and I hope I speak for the rest of the committee. Just wanted to wish you and Kieran very best on your upcoming wedding.
Yes, hope it happens.
Thank you very much.
Save us some cake session, please.
As we get married, as we come through our service in the Civic Centre in the next few weeks, you may see us around. But right, thank you all, and see you in September. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Right.